We'll begin today's service with a reading from Rays of the One Light, the weekly commentaries of the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. This is from Swamiji, week 25, the Eternal Now. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. When will I find God? Many devotees have asked this question. Because worldly goals require time, usually for their fulfillment, we imagine time to be a factor on the spiritual path. And so it is, but only because we think it is. God is as much with us now as he will ever be. It is not he who needs to come to us, we need to come to him. And that process of coming is a matter of transforming our self-perception. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 4, Jesus Christ says, "Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest? Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest." There is a practical teaching in these words, apart from their statement that we have God already and have only to realize that truth. Jesus is saying, lift up your eyes and look. To hold the eyes uplifted is the best position for meditation, for the seat of superconsciousness lies at a point midway between the eyebrows, in the frontal lobe of the brain just behind that point. This point is known also as the Christ Center. By lifting up your eyes and concentrating there, you will find it easier to enter the state of ecstasy. That is why saints in every religion have often been observed during states of deep inner communion, with their eyes uplifted, focused on the inner light, white, as Jesus said, already to harvest. The Bhagavad Gita goes further into this meditative teaching. In the 6th chapter, it states, holding the spine firm, the neck and head erect and motionless, let the yogi focus his eyes at the starting place of the nose, the point between the eyebrows. Let not his gaze roam elsewhere. In meditation, tell yourself, I have him already. I am alive forever in the divine light. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Oh, 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 oh.
What a beautiful week this week. It's a really nice follow-on actually from last week where we had Nara Swami's Bhagavati and Ramesha, who spoke to us really about Ananda music. And one of the questions that was put up through the talk was, well, how do you relate Swami's music to everyday living? And there was some gold moments in that talk. So if you haven't seen it, please jump on to our YouTube channel and have a look at that talk. It was just very profound in what it said. And one of the questions that was posed by Lisa and David Clark was, well, how do you live? You know, how has Swami's music changed you in your everyday living? And, you know, if we look at this rays of one light, essentially that's what we're asking. It's the eternal now. Like, how do we live? What is the eternal now? And I got a little bit of a funny story. Some may not see it so funny, but I kind of found it quite humorous. I spent years as an intensive care paramedic, and of course I was an intensive care paramedic because I wore the uniform and did the training and, you know, worked the job. So, of course, I was identified as being an intensive care paramedic. I got called to this place one day for a drug overdose. It was a narcotic overdose. And anyway, I raced down there. There was a crew on scene that didn't have the right tools. And so they called us there. And in my uniform and the vehicle that I was driving, I used my tools, so lights and sirens, and ran through traffic and went on the wrong side of the road. So, of course, I was an intensive care paramedic, and I turned up to this job, and it was this amazing, it was in one of the richest areas of Sydney. So it was a really well, nice placed home. And, rode up through the gates and was met at the front door and went through the 7 or 8 levels that were in this house down to the waterfront and to this young girl who had overdosed. It was a good story. We managed to use some medication and some resus tools and got this girl back. And while I was standing there at the end of it, just helping the crew there, the dad got quite irate at the daughter that had overdosed and said to her, I told you, if you keep going down this path, you're going to end up with a job like these guys, referring to us as paramedics. And it was quite an eye-opening moment because, of course, at first my ego was really hurt by that. But the more I reflected on it, I thought, wow, what a view this dad has. He's in his palace, and he has his identification with who he is. And obviously his identification is with wealth and money, and whatever he did, I don't even know what he did. And then I thought, well, from his perspective, here we are just lonely government workers on minimum pay that run around and help people. And well, of course, that's not what he wants for his daughter, because his vision of who he is and what he reflects is something different. And it was such a beautiful awakening, really, in myself, because here I was identifying with being a paramedic. Of course, I did. I was this person that did the training, wore the uniform, attended jobs and helped people. And that's who I was, or I believed I was. And if you think about that in this very moment, these are one in trillions of identifications since we're born of who we think we are from the minute we're born. We're this child. And I was listening to a talk about a child, and it's that children can very quickly fall into the trap of identifying with being a child and be of that helpless and rely solely on their parents. And Swami mentioned this in the talk. He said, but if that child loses both his parents, the eldest child in a lot of countries then has to become the parent. So quickly their identification changes from being a child to being a parent. And so throughout life, think of all the identifications that we have throughout life. And, as you're sitting reflecting to the point where you are now and what you do, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because deep behind it, there's the observer. There's this person that has lived through all of them. And even in the word identify, something or somebody or something within you is actually identifying with that thing, identifying with being a paramedic, identifying with being a child, identifying with being a mother, identifying with all these things. So it's kind of interesting when you start looking at the way we are of this world. We are constantly identifying with these things, but ultimately through all scriptures, we know that everything is God, that we are God, our soul is God, and that we are connected with that. But how quickly we forget that. And it's kind of the essence of this is that, when we saw that last week, Bhagavati said, she was this amazingly, I think she said she did a master's, correct me if I'm wrong, in being a flautist. And then came into Ananda, and her identification was this performer. And she came into Ananda, and the first thing that she did was take second fiddle or step back, and had other people that ran the music. And she'd had all these years of training, and she identified with the fact that she had to lose her identity with being this amazing performer or flautist, because Swami talked about that music of getting all of that. And really all those identifications really are identification with the ego. And it's removing all those elements of identification to get to the root of all things, which is the soul, and seeing God as the doer in all things. And, you know, it's kind of interesting when we say that, because God being the doer in all things is used quite often. And, you know, how do we go about that and what do we do? So I did a little bit of research before today and looked at how that kind of works, because really, when you think about it, if we're identifying with all these things, these people or these jobs or this place on earth, think about it from God's perspective. Essentially, God's there, but no one's listening. God's there, but no one's seeing. It's because we're constantly being projected outward in what we're doing and not identifying with that. And we're forgetting how to go about it. And the words from the rays of one light from the Gita basically say that holding the spine firm, the neck and head erect and motionless, let the yogi focus his eye on the starting place of the nose, point between them, let not his gaze roam elsewhere. It's the internal perspective. It's taking the fact that God is within us. And the way we do that is sit in stillness or in silence enough to let go of the ego to be able to see the oneness in all things. And that identification with it. And it's thinking, well, could you imagine being poor God who sits there and provides us with this whole play, but we don't take enough time to sit or listen? So it got me thinking, well, what do we know from this worldly perspective of what that would be? And there's some amongst us that are psychologists or study these things, and it's there's some real things. It says how to make people feel seen and heard. You know, there's some pretty key elements to that. And so this isn't off one paper, this is off quite a few that all have a similar theme to that. And same with healthcare, nurses, seen and not heard. So I'm going to just put some key points, and let's relate them to how we should live our life, or look at the relationship between being seen and not heard and our relationship for self-realization. And the first one that comes up is be fully present. So if you have someone that is seen and not heard and you're around them, how can we relate to them? It's being fully present. It's being here in the moment. And that's one of those things, you know, our ego attaches to what we've previously been and what we identify with, or what we want to identify with. But being in the present moment means that we can actually be here right now and be one with God, and go inward and feel that and identify. So that's the first point, be fully present. The second one that came up very regularly was active listening. It's taking the time to actively listen to people. What is meditation? We talk about prayer, we talk about devotion. They're all outward things, but actively listening is taking the time to be present, to listen. And we've got these amazing techniques, don't we? We've got Hong So, we've got, you know, to the point of Kriya, we've got all these techniques that work on actively listening. So that was the second one. The third one was reflective listening. So what does that mean?
Introspection.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Introspection. So when we're looking at from the point of view of actively listening, let's seeing and putting it into perspective, or reflective listening to what we're actually hearing, because we conjure up in our mind constantly what we think we're hearing. And we've our beautiful daughter asks us questions all the time, and I say they're amazing. We all should ask questions, but you have to be willing to listen to the answer. And because how often do we ask lots of questions, but in our own mind we've already got the answer, and we go off thinking, oh, we've heard. So it's reflective, really thinking and taking the time to get through that silence and listen to what's going on. The next one is, interesting enough, hold space for them. What a simple tool. Hold space for that person that is not feeling like they're listening or heard. What does that mean? We talk about it all the time. Meditation, morning, night. When we've got those still periods of time, we can fill it with japa. We can fill it with prayer. We can fill it with chanting, with music. All these kind of things. We've got these beautiful toolbox to get us to the point of actually listening and letting God feel that they're listened to and heard. I love this one. The fifth one is offer complete non-judgment. How often in life do we go through life? I can't believe God let this happen to me. I can't believe that, this judgment, this blame of what's happening, whether it's good or bad, it's this complete, our world is judgment, isn't it? Oh, I can't believe it's raining again. I can't believe how cold it is. As we go through life, that's exactly what we're doing. So if we flip that and we think, if we're constantly judging, God mustn't feel heard or listened to. So if we flip that over, offer complete non-judgment. It's accepting everything that as is. That's one of my favorite.
And people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sixth one is validate their feelings. So what we're hearing and what we're doing is validating it. And this whole path, the art and science, is an amazing thing. And Swami and Master talk about the eternal religion. It is truth. And that's all that we're talking about. It is eternal truth. Sanatan Dharma, it doesn't matter whether we call it Christianity, Hinduism, whatever it is, there is the eternal truth. And that is that validation of the feeling. We can validate most things with the truth as we go through life. Number 7 was listen without trying to fix. Think about that ego that gets in the road, and we're constantly trying to fix whatever we do. It's amazing. We sit through life and, the weather's coming down or something's happening. And it's like, oh, well, maybe if we do this, or maybe if we do that, where the eternal fixes. It's the way we've been programmed, I guess, in our brains to constantly want to fix what's actually there. But what about that surrender? What about surrendering and saying, well, let's not try and fix it. Let's not fix the thing. Let's fix us. Let's sit and really find out what we need to learn. What is our lesson? What do we need to do in relation to moving forward? And the last one that we've got here, number 8, is remind them how much they mean to you. I love that. Remind them how much they mean to you. And that is devotion. God is a feeling of love. Like, that's the devotion. It's the heart opening. Really remind in everything that we do how much they mean to you. And I think it's just such a beautiful way to look at, think of God as not being heard or listened to all the time. And no wonder we don't get anywhere. And what does that do to us? It makes us suffer because we don't really, it's the suffering that we go through, and we're at a point in self-realization where we don't want to suffer anymore. We don't want to move on or keep going on the way that we're going through this world in this worldly way. And so we have been given these tools to completely let go and know within us how we can live life. And I love that's come up a few times here in Ananda Australia is, well, what does it really mean, this renunciation? What does renunciation mean in relation to this path? And renunciation really means it's letting go of all those egoic thoughts or identifications with everything that we do. And it's, you think of every single identification from the minute we're born to the point we are now in our life. That renunciation and letting go, we've got all the tools to do it. And it's such a beautiful path to go through. It ultimately gives us freedom because it's the ups and downs of being attached to the identification or the ego. And, I go back to the original story that I was telling about the paramedic. If my ego piped up, at that point of saving the daughter's life, and the ego of the father who made that statement. Could you imagine how that goes? And then you think about, well, in life, most disharmony comes about that because each person is identified with the ego that they believe is right. And next thing you know, there's these to and froing and ups and downs between the two of them in relation to it. But actually sitting back and looking at it and sitting in your soul thinking, well, none of this is me. I'm not actually a paramedic. I'm playing the role of a paramedic and I've done all these things, but that's not me. And therefore it diffuses the whole situation. You can actually look at it in a joyful way and think, well, hey, you know what? Part of him is actually right. So, you know, just in conclusion, really about, from my perspective, is that this living, or from today's thing, living the eternal now, is in every step of the way remembering that we need to listen and hear. If we're still enough to listen and hear, the only way to do that is to remove each element and peel away all the ego that's involved in it.
This is a really beautiful topic and very well shared in those points. And there's a very well-known quote that really captures all of this. And I feel like a lot of you could think of it right now, but it's be here now. If you want to know the eternal now, you have to be present. Another way of looking at it is one of those sayings of God is. Everything simply is God. Everything that happens comes from God for us. And those little prepositions and those phrases are actually really, really important, because how many people go around the day saying, this is happening to me? Why can't things be different? And so one of the keys in experiencing God as eternity is to practice the presence of the divine throughout the day. And one of the ways that a lot of people find this to be helpful is in those moments where you catch the egos in control and it's starting that reactive process. Just pause, distract yourself for a little bit, go out in nature. Anything that you know in your heart is the way that your soul reconnects with the divine and can take that pause and experience the presence once more and recapture the soul being in charge. So whether or not you're going into it's almost a whirlpool, right? So that whirlpool of reactivity, of a mood, of a thought trail, you know how they take you on a journey, certain thoughts, and then before you know it, you've gone down the rabbit hole again. But the power is in the pause. So not allowing anything but in that present moment, taking a breath and reconnecting with spirit. And the tips in this week's reading are really simple. Lift your gaze. You can even just practice Hong Sa up and down the bridge of the nose, bringing it back up to that point between the eyebrows, but focusing on the breath. Honestly, sometimes we just have to go back to the basics. You know, the basics are the mind breath connection. We still the breath, then our mind can still, and then the soul can come back in charge. So next time during the day you find yourself running down the rabbit hole, just take that opportunity to pause and remind yourself to be here now. Because as soon as you bring your awareness back into the present, you'll find that you can access the solution consciousness. And if you really want to make it simple, it's just lifting your gaze again. So if there is a moment where you're at work and something difficult's happening, or if you're speaking to another person and you can feel that there's a little trouble a brewing, one of the things Swamiji said is relate to people from here. So even if you don't close your eyes, because that might look a little funny if someone's starting to get frustrated with you, or vice versa, but if you just bring your gaze up and you start to send the present quality of the divine that, in that moment you feel to call on, whether it is joy or calmness or love or power even, but feeling it and then sending it from the spiritual eye to that soul's spiritual eye. And the other thing that Swamiji said for being able to feel the presence of God is to do more exercises where you expand your sense of time. And it's almost like an experience of relativity. So feeling yourself as not confined to space, feeling the soul present in the country and the world and the galaxy and the universe, looking at pictures of space. For a long time, Swamiji's screensaver was pictures of space. And if you go into his meditation room, or if you've ever seen pictures, it was stars and the night sky. The idea just being that the less you identify with your little self in that moment, and you remind yourself that you're actually connected to eternity. There is no time and space. You're actually part of an infinite consciousness. So those are little things that you can even bring into your meditation, or just use as a tool to expand in that moment. Because it's when we contract and we get stuck and we identify in the littlest of ways that we get trapped. But we all know that when we apply these teachings, we expand, we feel joy again, we reunite, our relationships can find harmony again. And that's when we really get to be the change, that we're all trying to do. We all want the world to be a better place, but we have to take those little moments to achieve that reality in ourselves, so that we can be little ripples of the eternal now, and share the power of that listening, of that presence with everyone throughout our week, throughout our day. And as Lahiri said, it's really with each breath that we get to change ourselves. It's not just a day, a minute, it's each breath. So you can restart anew in the moment by being here now. So thank you for being with us and enjoying this time together. It was so lovely. I'll just end the recording now.